What if I told you that in a simple private test, without cameras, without pressure, Lewis Hamilton discovered something within Ferrari that could completely change the balance of power in Formula One? Because what Hamilton revealed after lapping at Fiorano is not just about speed. It is about a hidden problem that Ferrari has had for years, and that now, for the first time, someone seems to have truly understood. To really understand why what happened in Fiorano has generated such an impact within Formula One, we must first go back a few steps and analyze the real context in which Lewis Hamilton arrives at Ferrari. Because this doesn't start in the test. It starts from the moment the Briton gets into the car for the first time and faces a reality that was not what many expected. Ferrari came from 2024, where it had taken an important step forward, getting closer to the fight for the championship and showing a much more solid structure than in previous years. However, that progress had a very clear crack that not everyone saw. The car was fast, but unpredictable. And that detail in modern Formula One is practically a sentence. When the 2025 season begins, that inconsistency begins to become evident. In Australia, both Hamilton and Charles Leclerc find themselves with a car that does not respond reliably, especially in changing conditions. Hamilton, in fact, recognized from the beginning that the adaptation process was not going to be immediate, that the car required a much deeper understanding than he had anticipated. And this is where the first big key point of this story begins. Hamilton does not arrive at Ferrari just as a driver. He arrives as a diagnostic tool. Because while other drivers are simply trying to adapt to the car, Hamilton is starting to do something different. He begins to change his driving style, to modify the way he attacks corners, even adopting techniques that he did not use before, getting closer to Leclerc's approach to find performance where the car apparently did not have it. This is not minor. This is a driver reprogramming his driving to understand a deeper problem. But even so, Ferrari still did not have clear answers. The data didn't quite add up. What the simulator said did not coincide with what was happening on the track. And that has been, for years, the team's true Achilles heel, the lack of correlation. And then Fiorano arrives. A test that, in theory, was not going to change anything. A simple tire development program. Without media pressure, without direct competition, without the need to look for times. But precisely for that reason, it was the perfect setting. Because for the first time, Hamilton could focus solely on one thing. Understanding the car without distractions, without external variables, without the chaos of a race weekend. And this is where begins what many within the paddock are already considering as a turning point. Because what Hamilton found doesn't just explain Ferrari's problems. It completely redefines them. And this is where the story takes a completely unexpected turn. Because what Lewis Hamilton begins to discover in Fiorano does not fit with the narrative that Ferrari had been dragging for years. For a long time, the team had lived with the idea that its problem was purely technical. Lack of downforce in certain conditions, difficulty managing tires, or limitations compared to other teams on certain tracks. But what emerges from this test points to something much deeper, and much more uncomfortable. Hamilton begins to ride in controlled conditions, repeating laps, fine-tuning every corner entry, every braking, every energy transition. And little by little, something begins to become evident. The car is not inconsistent by nature. The car responds differently depending on how it is challenged. This nuance changes everything. Because it means that the problem is not only in the SF25 or SF26 as a concept, but in how its operating window was being interpreted. For years, Ferrari had been chasing external solutions, trying to correct behavior without fully understanding the real source of the problem. And this is where Hamilton makes the difference. With your experience, you begin to isolate variables. It reduces errors, eliminates aggressive input peaks, smooths transitions, and the car begins to react in a much more predictable way. Not perfect, but coherent. And that is exactly what Ferrari had not achieved: consistency. This connects directly to one of the team's biggest historical deficits: the correlation between simulator and track. When data is inconsistent, engineers work virtually blind. Every improvement is a gamble, every evolution is an unknown. But when a driver like Hamilton manages to stabilize that information, everything begins to align. And here comes the revelation that really shakes the paddock. Ferrari didn't have a pure lack of performance problem, it had a performance reading problem. Because the moment Hamilton finds that balance, areas of performance begin to appear that simply did not exist before. Especially in the management of the hybrid system, where each corner exit becomes an opportunity to save time if the available energy is used correctly. This is key in the new era of Formula One, where the electrical part has a much greater weight. And Hamilton, thanks to his experience, manages to identify exactly when to deploy that power, how to do it without compromising traction, and how to maintain the car's stability in critical conditions. But there is something even more important. This discovery not only affects immediate performance, it directly affects the development of the car. Because if Ferrari now really understands how their car works, it means that for the first time in a long time they can develop on a real basis, not on assumptions. Every data Hamilton generates has value. Each turn stops being an unknown and becomes an answer. And this begins to generate a feeling within the team that has not been seen for years: clarity. But of course, if Ferrari now has clarity, the big question is inevitable. What happens when that knowledge is translated to a real race weekend? Because that's where everything can explode. And this is where everything ends up falling into place. And at the same time, where everything becomes much more dangerous for the rest of the grid. Because what Lewis Hamilton has discovered in Fiorano does not remain in a private test. It is not isolated data. It is a key that can unlock Ferrari's true potential in the middle of the season. Until now, the team lived in a kind of constant uncertainty. They had speed, yes, but they didn't know how to access it consistently. One weekend they could seem like candidates for the podium, and the next they could disappear completely from the map. That roller coaster of performance not only affected the results, it affected decision-making, development, and internal confidence. But after what Hamilton has revealed, that scenario changes radically. Because if the car responds when demanded in the correct way, if the operating window exists and has now been identified, then Ferrari is no longer lost. It was simply misguided. And here comes the most important part of all this. When a team understands its car, progress stops being slow and becomes exponential. Every adjustment starts to make sense. Each evolution is built on a solid foundation. Each track session stops being an experiment and becomes an execution. And this, transferred to a race weekend, can have an immediate impact. Because now Hamilton not only knows how to extract performance, he knows how to find it when the car doesn't give it naturally. And that, in changing conditions, on complicated circuits, at critical moments in qualifying or the race, is a brutal advantage. Furthermore, this also completely changes the internal dynamic with Charles Leclerc. Because Ferrari no longer has two drivers looking for answers through different paths. It now has two references that can converge in the same direction, further accelerating development. But the most disturbing thing for the rest is not that. The most disturbing thing is that this comes just now, when the season is still open, when the differences between teams are not definitive, when there is real room to change the course of the championship. Because if Ferrari starts to apply everything that Hamilton has discovered, we are no longer talking about improving a few tenths. We are talking about changing the competitive order. And that leaves one last question in the air, a question that right now no one in the paddock can ignore. What if this test in Fiorano was not just a test? What started as a simple test at Fiorano has ended up revealing something that goes far beyond a few laps on the track. Lewis Hamilton has not only adapted to Ferrari, he has exposed a truth that had been hidden within the team for years. The problem was never just the car, but the way in which it was understood. Because when a pilot is able to transform chaotic data into clear information, when he manages to find coherence where before there was only doubt, he not only improves performance, he changes the direction of an entire project. And that is exactly what has happened here. Ferrari, for the first time in a long time, no longer seems like a team reacting to problems, but one that is beginning to understand them. And in modern Formula One, that difference is abysmal. Now the scenario is completely different. It's no longer a question of whether the car has potential, but of how much of that potential they are capable of releasing from this moment on. Because with the foundation that Hamilton has built at Fiorano, each race stops being an unknown and becomes a real opportunity. And meanwhile, the rest of the teams watch, because they know that when Ferrari finds clarity, it stops being just another contender. It becomes a threat. And if everything Hamilton has revealed translates to the track, so what is coming for Formula One is not a simple evolution. It is a change of balance. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.